I'm John. I'm here from Senior U Therapy Gardens. How many folks are familiar with us, with Therapy Gardens and Senior U? We've been here a bunch of times. Okay, a couple. I should probably tell you who we are for those of you that don't know us. Therapy Gardens was how we were started, and that was 3 years ago. Started by a gentleman who was a former high school principal, and his objective initially was to bring the therapeutic benefits of gardening to seniors in Massachusetts. So we were trying to bring around dirt, elevated garden beds to senior centers and encouraging people to get into the gardening. And what we found out was that the hardcore gardeners were all set. They were already doing the gardening at home. And there were some senior centers that had some programs, but people liked it much more when we talked about gardening than we did the practical stuff. So that workshop format gradually became all that we do. And it was originally things like preserve your garden, harvest, make your own herb garden, things associated with gardening. But then the subject for the workshops expanded well beyond gardening. So now we do stuff as diverse as, we have one on artificial intelligence that's really popular now. We have stuff like tech essentials, so we help people understand how can I use the stuff that they call free online, like YouTube or other things, to watch my favorite movies without compromising my identity, my safety, my money. We have somebody who's really tech savvy that shows how to do that. That's pretty good. So we do all sorts of different things now, and now we were in, I think, 95 cities and towns in Massachusetts that we go to, and we visit a lot of those on a regular basis. So yeah, and the different, as I said, the different stuff that we do. What are the ones that you've been to before? Do you remember?
There was one where we did one about soups. We did one about the bar pizzas in the South Shore.
Yeah.
Help me out, Janice. What else did we have?
I was the same one, so.
Some of the stuff is just like pure fun.
I know I've been to like 4 or 5. I just can't remember.
Okay.
I guess the soup and the pizza really stuck.
I only went to a huge one.
I mean, some of the stuff like, we do trivia ones, like food trivia, where we ask you about food stuff in Massachusetts, stuff that was here and is gone now, and that's just pure fun. And then other stuff that's popular right now, there's one on Get Better Sleep that I do, that I really like, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback. We're such a caffeinated culture. So many of us don't get the sleep that we need.
That's me.
And there's a lot of new stuff that shows different tips, different hedges against not getting enough sleep that we. So anyway, if that interests you at all, and if you want a copy of this presentation or any of our presentations, if you go to our website, therapygardens.com or seniorU.com, and give us your email address, sign up for our monthly newsletter. What really ticks us off is when people take your personal information and use it somewhere else. So we don't share your email address with anybody. And you can get a copy of any of our presentations, and you'll automatically get our monthly newsletter in your inbox. So that's who we are, who I am, and who we are. Any questions about Therapy Gardens or Senior U before we start? Okay. So for highly processed foods, do you want the good news or the bad news first?
Good news.
You want the good news first? Okay. The good news is that there really are little tweaks that all of us can make in our diets that will improve our lives. And that the good news is also that if you're able to make those tweaks or changes and you stick with them, there's not too much time before you'll see actual changes. You'll see changes in your body, and more specifically, you're probably going to feel them. You're going to feel a lot better, probably less tired, probably more focused, and just generally better. So there really are differences that you can make. A lot of this is pretty intimidating in a lot of ways, so I think that's important to remember. The flip side of that, I would say before I start, do you remember in the 1990s when the tobacco executives, the people that run the biggest tobacco companies in the country, testified before Congress, and Congress pushed them and said, are your products addictive? and they stood up one by one to answer that question. Does anybody remember that?
Not really.
Okay. It was on television, and you can find the tape on YouTube. To a person, each one of those people answered no. They said, our products are not addictive at all. And we know that nicotine is probably one of the most addictive substances on the planet. It's akin to heroin in terms of, it's almost, they say that biochemically you can kind of make it your own. It's insidious. It's technically a stimulant, but you can make it a depressant. It's incredible how addictive it actually is. So what does that event tell us? Well, that event tells us a few things. One of the things that I read in a number of places that happened after that event was that a lot of the folks that worked for Big Tobacco to figure out how to make those products and keep you addicted in buying them, not that there was that much creativity required because of the nicotine, but a lot of those executives, a lot of those people, scientists, went to work for the food industry, for the big food industry. And in the last 30 years, the highly processed foods have become ubiquitous. They're all over in our diet. It's hard to escape them. So now that they say, I think for the average American teenager, 67% of the calories they consume come from highly processed foods, which is really discouraging when you consider some of the health implications that we'll take a look at here. So let's get started. So an overview. Ultra-processed foods are foods that have undergone significant industrial processing and often contain ingredients not typically used in home cooking. They include preservatives, emulsifiers, sweeteners, artificial colors and flavors, and have a long shelf life. Ultra-processed foods contribute to a number of chronic health conditions and can cause early death. Examples include ice cream, packaged products, and some other foods that might surprise you. Today, we will help you identify and eliminate ultra-processed foods from your diet. So part of the reason why I tell that horror story first and the cigarette one is that if you're like me, for a lot of us tend to think in black and white, either or, and what we're going to do about a problem. And I'm trying to think that, for example, with the processed foods, you can either, a lot of us can say, the heck with it, how am I going to fight this? And if you consider, I would say it's important that you give yourself a break, because there's a lot of sophisticated science that's gone into making these foods impossible to resist. And on top of that, each of us has our own stories. Each of us might have limited funds, and the only thing available or affordable is a processed food. We might metabolize things differently. My partner metabolizes sugar in a certain way. I've never seen her eat more than me in my entire life, but she really struggles with weight. So there are all these factors that you have to consider. But what I would say is when you hear about the horror of how addictive these foods are, hear that in your mind as giving yourself a break. Instead of saying, I have failed and failed miserably, think of yourself as, okay, I'm subject to all of this, sophisticated science and people with a lot of money trying to attach me to these foods. Let's see here. So what are processed foods exactly? So they've been altered from their natural state through methods like cooking, freezing, and canning, adding ingredients to enhance flavor, extend shelf life, or improve convenience. So a processed food isn't necessarily a bad thing. In some ways, a processed food can be okay. It's when they become highly processed. And just to put it simply, it's once they really get it to a state where it doesn't look like anything that you would find in nature, then we're beginning to find out that that's really horrible for our body and our brain, our mood, for all sorts of different things. So 3 types of processed foods for our purposes today: minimally processed, processed, and ultra-processed. So minimally processed foods. These are foods that are altered slightly for preservation but retain most of their natural state and nutrients. So fresh cut vegetables are actually considered minimally processed. Roasted nuts, whole grains like brown rice, and minimally processed foods are an acceptable alternative. They provide convenience, better access to nutrients, and cost benefits with only slight alterations that maintain their nutritional value. They also have better nutrient retention and fewer additives. Processed foods. So processed foods have undergone significant changes through methods like cooking, freezing, or adding ingredients. So really different from the natural state of the food. So canned beans, almost all of which have a lot of salt added to them. Different kinds of cheese, bread, and dry pasta. Cheese is a tough one because you can find a lot of cheese that has, like American cheese, has all sorts of different chemicals that's inside of it. And even cheddar cheese, a lot of times will have a fair amount of added salt or different things to stabilize it and have it last longer. But you can get minimally processed cheese too, and stuff like feta and ricotta are considered cheeses that are processed a lot less. Bread and dry pasta, a couple of other examples. Processed foods can be acceptable in moderation, especially when they help increase variety, convenience, and access to essential nutrients that might otherwise be difficult to obtain. So when I've given this before, for what it's worth, I include my own personal experience. And for me, I kind of tell myself that I try to eat well most of the time, and for me, most of the time is maybe about two-thirds of the time when I'm doing well. And then I give myself license to not eat healthy or well for the other third. So, and I'm not suggesting this as a plan, I'm not a doctor. But for example, this morning I had oatmeal, which is actually considered minimally processed, but still really good for you. I had oatmeal with blueberries and banana.
Sounds good.
It was really good. And then I went to get a cup of coffee at this place, the Beanery in Easton, where I like to get a cup of coffee once in a while if I'm not making it at home. And when I went in there, the cream donut looked really good to me. So I also got a vanilla cream donut on top of my oatmeal. Probably not the best thing. And the other thing that people ask me is, like for instance, hot dogs. Hot dogs are near the top of the list for the worst things for you. The interesting thing that I read, you can find anything online today, needless to say. You can find something that's presented as an absolute fact, and then you can see something that contradicts it in the next sentence. It's kind of ridiculous, but one of the things that I saw was a study they were saying of foods that can add or subtract to your life. And they said that a beef hot dog in a white bread bun will take that was 33 minutes subtracted from your life for eating a beef hot dog. And they had time frames for all these other foods. So obviously you can get obsessive about it and beat yourself up about it. And obviously that's counterproductive. It's not worthwhile. So hopefully that's not what I'm inspiring. Ultra-processed foods. These are foods that have been heavily altered with industrial ingredients and additives, often high in sugars, fats, and artificial substances, and very low in nutritional value. Soda is right on top of the list. Soda's really just about the worst. I know I mentioned the hot dog, but the soda's up there too. Instant noodles, packaged snack cakes, and ultra-processed foods should be avoided whenever we can because of the sugars, the fats, and the artificial ingredients, which can give us a lot of health issues. Why are they bad for us, the ultra-processed foods? They often contain high levels of, as we said, fat, salt, and sugar, and that impacts high blood pressure, heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, anxiety, and depression and early death. And the more that I've read, I mean, a lot of these studies are just beginning to happen. I've read a lot about depression, a lot about mood, and how that's associated with the proportion of calories that you put in your body that are highly processed. Many of the long-term health implications are only now being realized. Here is a little bit of research. Several studies have linked high consumption of ultra-processed foods with negative health outcomes for high blood pressure. This is a study that tracked 10,000 Australian women for 15 years, and the ones that had the highest consumption of ultra-processed foods were 39% more likely to have high blood pressure. Cardiovascular events. A larger analysis involving over 325,000 individuals showed 24% higher likelihood of serious heart and circulatory events in those consuming the most ultra-processed foods. And early death, a Spanish study with 19,899 participants found that high intake of ultra-processed foods was associated with a 62% higher risk of early death. The interesting health thing that I read this morning was about cholesterol. And I don't know, have you guys seen this about cholesterol? The latest thing about cholesterol, you know, forever you go in, you get your blood analyzed, and they come back and say, oh, you have high cholesterol, and so the doctor puts you on, I think, one of the most popular and profitable drugs in the world for high blood pressure. For high cholesterol, to try and get it down. Now, the articles that I've read most recently said a lot of respected scientists are saying that your cholesterol becomes high to protect against something else that's going on. So to have a pill that would artificially bring down the cholesterol but not address those other issues affecting your cardiovascular system is absurd. So I only serve that up because in many ways you can reduce this to something really simple. And the way to reduce it, I think, to something really simple is try and mostly eat things that you would find in nature and that are still pretty close to the state where you would find them in nature. Things that don't come in bags and stuff like that. Yeah, and then you're going to be best off that way. Ultra-processed foods are linked to higher risk of cancer, heart disease, obesity, and early death. And now estimates are 71% of the food supply in the United States may contain ingredients created in a laboratory. Keep in mind, some processed foods can offer access to much needed nutrition. The key is to find the right balance for you and to only include minimally processed foods in your diet. Let's try it out. So, see if you can guess. Which of the following are ultra-processed? Which of the following are ultra-processed? What do people think? Bologna? Yeah, bologna. Absolutely.
And canned tuna.
Is canned tuna ultra-processed? These are the ones that are ultra-processed.
Well, that's right.
And part of me, when I first,
Can you read them? I can't see.
Oh, sure. This is, of the choices of which are ultra-processed are brie cheese, canned tuna, chicken nuggets, protein bars, and sliced bologna. And the ones that are ultra-processed are the chicken nuggets, the protein bars, and the sliced bologna.
Are there certain brands of the protein bars that are worse than others?
I expect that there are, but I think that what they're saying is, generally speaking, I mean, they're going to be highly processed.
Okay, I know that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that.
There's a lot of, I mean, when you look at the protein bars, almost so many of them have a fair amount of added sugar or salt in them. And I think most, well, you have to look at the individual. I don't think there's an exception. My mother is 88, and she's come to like not the protein bars, but the Kind bars. And she really likes those, and we've gone, and I shop with her once a week. And so I've been looking for something, because the Kind bars, their whole campaign is that they actually care about their customers as much as profit, right? So they're going to make something that's a little bit healthier. And then you really read the ingredients and you want to believe that. And I think they are better than a lot of other ones out there, but almost all of those bars are really processed and have a lot of stuff in them that's not found in nature. They also have a lot of added fat and salt. So they're definitely not ideal. So I'll tell you, when I first started considering this subject, what I was thinking about was, well, wait a minute, there's something that doesn't make sense to me here. And what didn't make sense to me was that if the processed foods have gone like this in my lifetime, I'm 62, so if the processed foods during the time I've been alive have become really, really popular, their prevalence in our diets have gone like this. So wait a minute, so why is the lifespan in the United States gone up during that period of time? Because I thought all of this says that this is killing us. That doesn't make sense to me. So I spent a little time trying to figure that out. And what I figured out, at least for me, for what that's worth, is that there were two mitigating factors to that. One of the mitigating factors, which is probably the biggest, is smoking cessation. In the middle of that time period, smoking was realized to be as bad as it is, and now it's a social stigma to smoke, and now so many people have given up, far fewer people start smoking. So that had a huge mitigating effect on whatever damage the ultra-processed foods were doing. That change was huge. The other thing to take into account is that now that age is no longer increasing. It's stabilized, and in many ways is starting to go down. So just because we had this period of time where it was going up, I think we are starting to die younger. And without other changes, arguably that would continue on its path. Let's see here. Peanut butter. What about peanut butter? Minimally processed, processed, or ultra-processed?
Can be all of
I don't want to even guess.
It's all bad.
So,
Processed.
yeah, everything except none of the above. So it can fall into any of the categories depending upon what's in it. Simply ground peanuts, it's considered minimally processed. Ground peanuts with salt or sugar or both is a processed food. And adding hydrogenated oil or emulsifiers like mono and diglycerides makes it an ultra-processed food. So I love peanut butter, and I love nuts. Nuts, too, are fantastic. You got to watch out about eating too much of them, which I do almost every time I have some, but they're nutrient dense. They're really good for you. And with peanut butter, at one point, I was giving this presentation, and I was talking about how much I like Teddy peanut butter. I just get the basic Teddy that has peanuts and salt in it, which I guess would be minimally processed. And I was talking about Teddy being a great choice. And there was a woman who said that she absolutely loved Teddy too, and she had hers with her. And she showed me her Teddy, and her Teddy, which isn't even for sale in the supermarket that I go to, had all of this extra stuff in it. It had either some kind of palm or hydrogenated oil in it. It had sugar in it. So, for instance, the peanut butter I eat is so different from, Skip and Jiffy are filled with these hydrogenated oils and sugar. So they're really not good for you. And you really have to, one of the things you really do have to do, given how much brain power is directed at getting you to buy things that aren't good for you, is you got to read labels. You got to participate a little bit in your own health choices. And that's what we're doing every time we go to the supermarket, right? And it's really difficult sometimes to do that. We either don't have the time, most of the time we don't have the time or the inclination to sit and read those things. I went the other day and turned the corner on the snack aisle. So the aisle that has chips and all the tasty, salty stuff. I'm a salt freak as opposed to sugar. Salt gets me more than sugar. And I was looking at the aisle, and I thought of another piece that I recently read about a slurry that a lot of these companies make. They make a slurry out of chemicals and some base ingredients that's colorless, I think maybe fairly odorless. And then out of that slurry, they can make tons of different products. So when I looked down that aisle, like the chip aisle, I was seeing all these beautiful colors. The colors were amazing. And the choices, it suggested that I have, my God, I'm so lucky. I could choose from among hundreds of different wonderful things to eat. But then you think realistically, in many ways, there's only one choice down that aisle. And folks smarter than me have said that when you're in the supermarket, I mean, you're best off buying from the perimeter. Whenever you go to the shelves, you're moving towards foods that are more processed. Do we have people who eat peanut butter? Yeah. And what kind of peanut butter do you eat? What brand?
Teddy sometimes and,
Teddy.
yeah.
Yeah?
Teddy.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what else is good? The sunflower seed butter from Trader Joe's.
Oh. Yeah, I keep trying to, because they say other nut butters are, and I've tried almond butter a couple times, but most of the times it's wicked expensive.
Yeah.
So sunflower
Sunflower seed butter.
at Trader Joe's.
Yeah, that's what they make the kids bring to school.
Oh,
Where
really?
they can't have peanuts. A lot of schools won't
okay.
let the kids bring peanut butter, so they use sunflower butter.
Makes sense.
But
Okay.
I like Whole Foods fresh ground peanuts. But you're
nice.
saying those are processed? How is that processed if it's just a peanut?
Well, no, here we go.
It's minimally, but
simply-
it's not the same as putting nut peanuts in your mouth and chewing them?
Right, it's just because it's ground. So processing, the point there being processed isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Sometimes it just makes it easier to access the foods or to bring them along or to eat them. Yeah. I'm trying to think, you mentioned Whole Foods. So for Whole Foods, one of the things, I forget if we mentioned this later on here, but one of the worst things for us that many of us eat a lot of are deli meats, right? Deli meats have preservatives in them. They were made long ago in a factory far away. I still like the convenience of and taste of meat in a sandwich, right? So, and at the same time, Whole Foods is just so expensive. And whenever I go in there, I have to be careful to not spend money I don't have. So I try and make a special visit, like once a week, if I'm lucky, or maybe 2 times a month, and make myself just go and get the turkey, because they cook turkey themselves there, and I can get it with no salt, no preservatives, and it's wonderful. It's just expensive.
Applegate's a good brand too, but I'm sure they have problems. The Applegate stuff.
Yeah.
There's no, and you know, they start, you know, it's not this, it's not that, it's, you know, none of this and none of that.
Right, that's the
But I'm
sophisticated.
sure there's some kind of process in there.
Well, that's the sophisticated marketing. What they're going to do is jump up and down and tell you everything that's not in it.
It's uncured.
Right.
It's not
I'll tell you-
sulfates, no sulfates.
And you keep hearing this long list that goes on and on. Well, if it doesn't have all of these bad things, then it
Right,
must be
got
really
it.
good. Yeah, so it's important to find out what is in fact in it. So what about seltzer?
Salsa?
Yeah, I love seltzer too. This is why this killed me.
Ultra processed, is what it is?
No, it's just water and flavor.
Seltzer, considered ultra processed with natural flavors, can contain emulsifiers and other industrial additives, as can artificial flavors. So I love, there's a particular seltzer that I love too that's flavored. I mean, because of this, I've tried to start drinking just club soda instead of the flavored stuff. As you can see, identifying processed foods can be challenging, but there are some things you can do. Look for marketing terms and additives to help you identify processing. So for here, this is the biggest thing here. So natural. So if let's say I'm making a food, or let's say one of you decides to start selling some food that you make. Can you put natural on the label for your food? Then it doesn't matter what your food is. Let's say you have something that you've made that includes a lot of different chemical additives and things like that. Can you advertise it as natural? Anybody know? You can, because natural is now what they call a term of art. A term of art is what a lawyer would call something that has a definite meaning. As far as the Food and Drug Administration goes, there is no regulation that says natural has to match to certain characteristics. You can call anything natural, so it's meaningless. So when you go out and you see something that says 100% natural, the first thing that should do is for me, is make me think, well, in what ways is this not natural? I mean, that's kind of a good way to think about it. So natural flavors include a wide range of additives and chemicals, things such as sodas and flavored waters. The low or fat-free term, what that usually indicates is that something has a lot of added sugar or artificial ingredients to compensate for the reduced fat content. Examples would be low-fat yogurt and fat-free cheese. When you hear something sugar-free, usually that means it contains artificial sweeteners or sugar alcohols, which can be heavily processed. Things like sugar-free candies and beverages. When you hear ready to eat, usually that means something that's been heavily processed to extend shelf life and flavor. Instant meals and packaged snacks. Usually there's a lot of preservatives that attach to the ready to eat marketing term. All natural. Not regulated and can be used on foods with heavy processing. So chips, cookies, etc. So if you have something that's particularly bad for people health-wise, I mean, why not put all natural on it? That sounds really cynical, but there you go. Vegan or plant-based. So stuff that's vegan or plant-based can also contain a lot of additives and preservatives. And examples are plant-based burgers and vegan sausages. So what are additives? Additives are a broad category of substances added to foods to enhance flavor, appearance, or shelf life. Definitions and specific ingredients can be somewhat unclear and loosely regulated. So common additives and uses would be things like preservatives. Put preservatives in food to reduce mold and bacteria. Obviously, you're going to stabilize or increase your profit if your food doesn't go bad before somebody has a chance to buy it. Emulsifiers keep incompatible ingredients from separating. So, for instance, if you buy marshmallow fluff, which is its own kind of strange chemical concoction, you're going to need an emulsifier. Colorants and dyes improve or maintain the appearance of the food. You have anti-foaming agents that prevent foaming during processing, and bulking agents add volume to foods without adding much nutritional value. So for so many of these things, for so long it's been really hard to find out what's going on. And I heard somebody lately talk about your ability, despite all the freedoms of access that we have in this country, somebody, if they were interested, to be able to go film what goes on in a slaughterhouse. A lot of people say that that's as closely guarded a secret as any, that it would be really difficult to do. A couple of more common additives and uses. Bleaching agents improve the color of food. Gelling agents create a gel-like consistency in foods. And glazing agents provide a shiny appearance on the surface of the food. And then added or altered sugar, salt, and fats enhance flavor to a famous bliss point that's hard to resist. They really want to make that food memorable in a way that a natural food could never compare to. And now they can leverage artificial intelligence to have that go out and figure out how to do that even better. So when I say all of these things, I also don't want to leave the impression of, I don't really want to set up or stage a world where there are evil people working at food companies and then good people being victimized who have to shop and eat, because I don't think that that ends up being really empowering to us and really helpful. The other thing that we have to consider and accept is that our own, just industrialization in general, has created this dynamic when most of us as opposed to 100 years ago, don't really have the time to make our own food. We're removed from it. We live in a specialized society. So some of this is inevitable. What you also have to consider is human nature. And human nature for us, too, our desire for ease and comfort plays into it. So we each have to take some responsibility, despite how daunting the task is of choosing the right stuff to eat. We still have to weigh those factors as well. So words to look for and avoid. Anytime you see artificial colorings, artificial flavors, bleaching agents, emulsifiers, high fructose corn syrup, monosodium glutamate, preservatives, stabilizers, sweeteners, and texturizers. Ideally, those are things to not make a regular part of your diet. I went to UMass Amherst I guess 40 years ago. And I grew up on the South Shore, and I used to hitchhike back and forth to UMass and Amherst. And I got some interesting rides hitchhiking. One time I got a ride from a guy who was a deaf Olympian. He had grown up, I think it was in Germany, and his parents had a couple of bucks, so they brought him here just because we had a program in the United States that would allow him to join a para or an Olympic team despite his deafness. And it was fascinating talking to him, and I realized he was reading my lips. And then it got dark outside, and then it didn't dawn on me. He sort of stopped talking. He couldn't understand me. And another time I got a ride from a guy who was one of the most engaging people that I ran into, and he was a flavor salesman. And this is 40 years ago.
How long? 40?
40 years ago.
Yeah.
It was the early 80s. And he worked, I think he had a big contract. He talked about the work that he did with Friendlies. He did a lot of work with Friendlies, but he would work for different other big food companies. And he was a very entertaining, nice guy. And he explained at that time, all of these, he was saying, you're totally in the dark about how much of a role what he did played in my life. And told me for about 45 minutes all the different ways that this technology worked its way into our diets, which was fascinating. So if you consider that, and now 40 years have passed, and the sophistication that's probably come to it in the interim. So additives and ingredient names. Texturizers. These are a long list of texturizers, and I won't torture you by reading all of them. But here, when you look at a lot of these strange names, and I don't know, you can't read these at all, right?
No, I can't see them.
Okay. Well, some of the texturizers are things like guar gum, xanthan gum, cornstarch, potato starch, cellulose gel, gelatin, emulsifiers, lecithin, sorbitan monostriate, sodium, well, I can't even read that, and preservatives, all sorts of different preservatives, sulfites, BHT, and bulking agents. Bulking agents are big to make the food appear bigger to the eye. Things like maltodextrin, polydextrose, inulin, cellulose, isomalt, sorbitol, and mannitol are all examples of that. Another story that I'll share is that my uncle is a former president of the Maine Organic Gardeners Association. He's got a farm in Maine that we've gone to for Thanksgiving. My family has for 50 years. So he and my aunt, we were always kind of considered the hippies of the extended family, and they were always talking about eating healthy, and we were always scratching our heads and saying, yeah, maybe. And now, these many years later, my cousins are adults, and they tell the story that when my aunt and uncle would leave, which wasn't often, but whenever they would be home by themselves as kids, they would find the sugar and they would just eat it they would eat it by the fistful because they were deprived of it. So I say that just because the whole looking at it black and white, as I'll say a lot of times, including your diet, whether it has to be completely healthy or completely not, is not the way to do it. So is this corn muffin mix ultra processed? What do you think?
Looks like it might be.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you see a bunch of ingredients and you scratch your head as to what some of them might be, I think you can pretty safely say that it is. Multiple ingredients, the long list, not typically found in a home kitchen, additives and preservatives, refined ingredients, enriched unbleached flour, soybean oil, stuff like that, sweeteners and oils. So cutting down on these, the best thing you can do is to eat whole foods wherever possible. Whole chickens to heads of lettuce. The less something is touched by a person or a machine, the better it is for you. So you're really doing yourself a favor if you can find and eat whole foods. And here are a few tips. Choose plain yogurt and add fresh fruit instead of flavored yogurts. Those flavored yogurts are insidious. I mean, a lot of them have a lot more sugar than you might think with the fruit that's in there. The fruit is just an excuse to sugar it up. And you're a lot better off if you just take plain Greek yogurt and you add your own fruit. This is for people, this points also to cooking at home. Obviously, if you're able to cook at home, if you have the time, the space, and the inclination, you're going to be a lot better off. Not just health-wise, but money-wise, if you do that. And as they say, you cook, if you're not a big fan of cooking all the time, and I know at least one person that does this, you cook larger amounts of food when you do cook. Have your cooking day once or twice a month, and cook larger amounts of food, and it might even warrant buying a freezer if you can afford it, which might pay for itself pretty soon, to freeze some of those foods. And I've got friends that have got it down really nice, so they've got complete meals that have been frozen that they just heat up. Choose oatmeal with fruit and nuts instead of breakfast cereals. Breakfast cereals are incredibly profitable for food companies, and the marketing is really sophisticated. So, the vitamin spray that they put on them at the end makes you think, "Oh my gosh, look, I'm getting all my vitamins and minerals from these." But they're almost all highly processed. They almost all have added sugar in them, and you would be better off in just about every instance in eating something else. You would also save money. Eat fresh fruit instead of store-bought pies, cakes, or candies. Yeah. Snack on nuts instead of crackers and other salty snacks. Do we have nut lovers? People eat nuts?
Trail mix, what do you want?
You do the trail mix?
Oh, yeah, a lot, yeah.
Okay. And what about other people? What kind of nuts?
Walnuts.
Walnuts?
Pecans, walnuts,
Pecans,
pistachios.
And does anybody eat them without salt?
Oh, always.
Always.
Everybody does. So you guys are a step ahead of me. Yeah. That's the way to do it, is without the salt.
Yummy with salt, but
Yeah, I
I like
know.
them unsalted.
Yeah.
So the granola mixes, the problem with a lot of the granola mixes is they do have added salt and sugar in them if you look at them. The other problem is they've gone through the roof as far as cost goes. So I know, I mentioned my mother, she's 88, she now makes her own granola. And she's not like a big cook or a big health person. She just thought she'd try it. And she really likes it. I think it's kind of a pain in the neck, so she doesn't do it all the time, but yeah. So take a balanced approach if you can. Instead of completely avoiding ultra-processed foods, focus on a balanced diet that includes plenty of minimally processed foods, like fruits, vegetables, fish, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. And reading food labels can help identify and reduce intake of high sugar, salt, or saturated fat foods. So I think that people are pretty resolved now to the fact that diets have severe limitations. And the limitation of a diet is that it's a temporary objective, right? So you say, I'm going to make this change, and once I reach this point, which might be a certain day, or it might be a certain weight, so then I'll be done. That's the worst part about a diet, and that's what leads people back to returning to the same problem that had them take up the diet. What success really is, as opposed to a diet, is a new habit. So if you can create a new habit that's going to endure, that's tons better than a diet. And the coolest thing that I heard about this recently, and I think you could apply it to food, was I was reading about this is a guy who was trying to develop a habit of going to the gym and exercising, but he just really hated exercising. So what he did was I think it was for 6 weeks, he told himself that he was going to go twice a week to the gym, but he made sure that he would not stay at the gym for more than 5 minutes. So he would go to the gym and go there, maybe do a couple of exercises and get a drink of water, and he would leave. And he did that. He did that because then that became part of his routine to go to the gym. And at least as of the writing of this article, he claimed that he did develop a new habit and now spends a little bit more than 5 minutes and does some exercise. So if you were to apply that to the food thing, I think you could do it in a number of different ways and be imaginative. You could maybe say at the outset, listen, all I'm going to do is pick one night a week, maybe 1 or 2 nights a week, when I'm going to have a minimally processed dinner, come hell or high water. And you tell yourself the rest of the time, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I'm going to eat a processed food and not worry about it. Something like that might be an approach that's worthwhile. And the Mediterranean diet, through thick and thin, is still considered, it really is, the healthy diet. Improves all sorts of good things and mitigates bad ones. Gut health included. So the Mediterranean, and you can find the examples of the Mediterranean diet are legion online. And this is Mr. Wheeler being funny here about we have a workshop on the Mediterranean diet as well. So, questions from people or things that you guys want to share. Anything about the diet and the processed foods.
What about fish?
What about fish? Okay.
I mean, fresh fish best, obviously, as opposed to frozen, but, I watched this thing, Seaspiracy. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
Horrifying. Didn't want to eat salmon ever again.
Right.
Because of what they do to it and how it's raised. But, is that still, that's part of the Mediterranean diet.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Fish is something that we have to stack everything against, what we've done to our environment and what we've done from the world to the world. And to think that there's going to be some place that's exempt from that is not really the case. There is going to be no place that's exempt from that. So we can really make slightly better choices. It's not like we can avoid the mistakes that humanity has made. We're going to run into them. So for fish, you keep hearing about how essential it is to include it in your diet. It's got the omega-3 fats that are just totally non-existent in the processed foods, that are essential for brain function, that really play a huge role in mood, the more that they talk about. And so it is worthwhile, I think, to figure out a way, how can I get fish into my diet? And what you're going to run into are, obviously you run into cost issues. It can be expensive in a lot of places. And as you point out, the processing, some people have said recently that the farmed salmon is the most unhealthy food on the planet. And that's the latest and greatest when they talk about that. And that's from the boom in the market for people buying salmon and the pens that they would farm them in, where they're stacked so you can't even see. It just looks like one gray mass. They have to put in a lot of antibiotics.
Well, we talked about the coloring, like what color do you want your salmon to be?
Right.
When we send it to you, what are they coloring it with? Do we know? I mean, is that a process?
Yeah, I mean,
Thing?
you can't, I don't know everything about it, but my understanding is you can have a big influence on color dependent upon what you feed them. And then, I don't know, you could probably add something artificial as well.
Right.
But the problem at that time was you had to also add a lot of antibiotics. Otherwise, the fish would die before you could sell them. So because of that, I mean, nothing is ever any one thing. So for instance, in Norway, which has a lot of great cold water that would be ideal for aqua agriculture, they've gone out of their way to do something different and to create healthy farmed salmon. And there are a lot of indications that they've been pretty successful in doing that. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out entirely, but at the very least, you want to find out, well, where did this come from? And there are some countries, I mean, do your own research, but I think Norway is making a consolidated effort to say no farmed salmon leaves here unless it meets the standards, the pretty strict regulations that they have. For fish overall, one thing to keep in mind is that, and I'm hoping that most of you know that the long-lived fish tend to accumulate the mercury and the other neurotoxins that we've put into the atmosphere in their flesh, which is what we eat. So the fish that live the longest present the biggest danger, and tuna is right at the top of the list.
Right.
So if you've got a developing brain, if you're an adolescent, you really shouldn't be eating it at all. And if you are our age, you should limit it because our bodies do get rid of toxic metals to some degree, but we're really limited in our ability to do that. When we get too much of it, it goes into our bones and eventually causes serious health problems. And in the near term, it can cause difficulties for your brain. So there are things you can do to mitigate that too. There's a process that your cells use naturally to clean themselves. And there are some that you can induce in different ways. One of the ways you induce that is through exercise. One of the ways that you can induce that is through fasting. But they say that you can probably induce a bit of that if you just maintain a healthy distance between the last time you eat at night and the first time you eat in the morning. You might get some of that benefit by doing that. The other thing that my daughter does, I'm a 62-year-old with a 14-year-old daughter. She found out herself that cilantro binds to heavy metals. There's something in cilantro that binds to heavy metals in the body and helps you excrete more of it. So now whenever we eat salmon, and she loves salmon, and I always try to get the wild stuff,
Right.
she always wants cilantro with it and eats it with cilantro. But beyond that, I mean, choose the right fish to avoid those different things if you can.
Wild caught, so just...
Which is its own. We could have a whole other thing on fish. I mean, I don't know if you saw recently, there was somebody, Consumer Reports, or somebody went out to buy fish, and I think it was something like some huge proportion, way over half of the fish that they bought was not the fish that was advertised. It was something totally different.
I think I saw something about that.
And somebody else told me recently, like Chilean sea bass, which resonates with all of us. I mean, that would be, if we go out to a restaurant, we hear that's on the menu, that there's no such thing. It's just a bunch of inexpensive fish in large supply during those years in the ocean off of Chile that they would catch and stick that label on it so that people don't have too many other questions. So I think it's worthwhile still, despite the challenges, trying to find fish and incorporating it. I keep trying to eat more of it, but yeah, there you go. Anything else? Other questions? I hope I haven't horrified you completely. I mean, maybe I want to horrify you a little bit if you consider the things. I mean, if you've got a diet where 3/4 of the calories you put in your body come from the processed foods, and you feel like crap a lot of the time, I mean, it might be bad news worth hearing. you know?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah,
It's good, yeah.
okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
Okay.